Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 9 Lives, the podcast where we dive into transformative journeys of self-discovery, growth, and the messy, beautiful process of living multiple lives in one. I'm Cassia, your host, and I'm so delighted you are here. Today is an episode I have wanted to do for 3 seasons, and I'm only getting around to doing it now, which is books that changed my life. I have them all with me here. I'm going to go through 8 books. Reading is a very important hobby of mine, and it has completely changed my life. Words and books and poetry have stirred more change in me than anything else on this earth. Nothing puts a fire in my belly like reading stories of brave warriors or brilliant women, or learning about the stars or the soul or the great philosophers, or the way that physics means that everything sings. Today, I'm going to do the much requested Books That Changed My Life episode. Reading changed my life. It really did. I stopped reading for a really long time because I could not sit still enough to read, and I couldn't give myself the space and time to sit and want to learn. As we've discussed in previous episodes, my cognitive function was incredibly low for a long time due to excessive alcohol consumption, bad food, no movement, all the stuff that makes those synapses stop firing. So I actually found it really hard to be well-read, well-spoken, and have hobbies because my brain wasn't working. So a great joy of mine, something I did when I was little, was I read and read and read and read and read. And actually 2 of these books here, The Shining and The Hobbit. Oh no, I don't have The Hobbit with me. Okay, well, lots of books that I read are actually childhood books that I grew up with, and they're the same editions, and I've reread them again, which is just really lovely. A few people have asked me to speak about how to read, and I know that sounds like a little bit of a strange question, but I think that it's a really important segment to have at the beginning of this episode because so many people struggle to get into reading. I will say as well that not everybody wants to sit down and read a book, and not everyone is going to find it the most enjoyable experience in the world. And that's where things like audiobooks come in. And we have so many available now that are just like accessible for you when you're walking or when you're running or, you know, whatever. There are so many ways to learn, whether it's YouTube videos or whatever. You know, I don't want to sit here and preach that everybody has to sit down for hours and read a proper book. I believe that it is important to have a physical book in your hands and read using your hands and your eyes. I think there's nothing more beautiful than doing that. But if you do struggle to sit down and do that, audiobooks are a good place to start. So there's a few tips and tricks that I would like to share about reading. Something that I have had to do, which was from someone who could not sit still for 5 minutes without distracting myself, to now being able to sit peacefully and read in the evenings. A couple of tips. Prioritize reading. I know that sounds very obvious, but treat reading as a habit, not an afterthought. Dedicate specific time slots for reading, for example, early morning, lunch breaks, or before bed. So I would literally just forget to read unless I reminded myself that this evening you wanted to read 3 pages of this book and 2 pages of that book. I have multiple books on the go. Usually that's just something I think that helps me as well with my reading. Some people only like to focus on one. You can schedule your reading sessions kind of like the way that you would schedule your workouts or your work. Use your calendar or phone to schedule 15 to 30-minute reading sessions each day. Start small and then gradually increase the time. I think we really look at reading, a lot of us, as like something that's boring or something from school, and reclaiming that for yourself and choosing books that feel exciting to you and books you know are going to further your development as a human can kind of reclaim that space for yourself and make it exciting. You can replace dead time. So identify wasted time in your day, for example, scrolling social media, waiting in line. Use this time for reading or audiobooks. Carry a physical book or use an e-reader app on your phone to read during idle moments. So the train, the bus. I live in London, so I use public transport every day. I'm always on the train, always on the bus. And I have a book in my bag pretty much every day, or I have a little Kindle that I use, or I listen to audiobooks. So I just think it's a really lovely way of making the space in your brain a little bit calmer and a little bit happier, to not be scrolling every minute that you have spare on the train or the bus. I'm always really encouraged when I see young people holding books on public transport. It makes me really happy to see people reading. I think it's great. So building concentration for reading is a big thing. Choosing the right environment, for example, finding a quiet, distraction-free space, turn off your phone notifications, put your phone on Do Not Disturb. Oh my God. I do this whenever I run, whenever I'm at the gym, whenever I'm doing Muay Thai, whenever I'm writing and researching for this podcast, whenever I'm writing for the book, whatever it is, my phone is on Do Not Disturb, because as soon as you see that little notification come up, you are taken out of the world of this and back into the world of your phone. And it's really, really important just to kind of create that space and that boundary for yourself. You can set some clear goals. So read X number of pages or chapters, like a focused session, like 20 minutes of focused reading. Again, start small and build up. You can use the Pomodoro technique, which a lot of people find really, really works for them. It works for me, which is 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, and then repeat. So I usually do 25 minutes, either it's like deep focus work or reading, 5 minutes up, get a cup of tea, get a cookie, whatever, back 25 minutes. And you can break up your day into segments like that. I try to read for an hour a day. It never really happens. Like, I think it's probably maybe half an hour broken up into 15 minutes or 10 minutes. But on the weekends, I try and do a little bit more. My problem is that I love books so much that I read so many multiples in one go and I jump between them. So I would say, yeah, that would be my top tips for starting to read and having the habit of reading. I think seeing it as something that's really analog is also really beautiful, and it's why I'm so drawn to it, because we all know digital stuff is not my favorite thing, and books just represent a time for me and a space for me that is like pre-internet and reminds me of my childhood and creates a really lovely, safe, very, calm environment for me to exist in. And not all of the books I'm going to talk about today are self-improvement. Some of them are, some of them aren't. I think it's good to read a good old, big, varied amount of books, whether that's from self-help to neuroscience to physics to fantasy to the classics, spiritualism. We've got it all here today. But these are the 8 that really changed my life. Like, all had very penny dropping, jaw dropping, oh my God, that makes so much sense. That has changed my life forever. And these are books that I still think about to this day, especially when I'm in difficult situations. I find them so comforting. I find them so intriguing. And I think they've made me a better person. They've made me a more worldly person. And if I hadn't have read these, I wouldn't have this podcast. So we will dive in with the first book, which I've spoken about before on my socials, but I wanted to bring it today as the first one because it is a nice entry to spiritualism, I would say, and it is the 4 Agreements by Miguel Ruiz. And this is a short book, so it's a really, really easy one to get into if you are someone who wants to get into learning a little bit about what spirituality is and what it can mean to you. But the book is a simple yet profound framework for personal freedom and happiness, drawing from ancient Toltec wisdom. It provides practical guidance on how to break free from self-limiting beliefs, societal conditionings, and enabling you to live authentically and with inner peace. So I'll read the 4 Agreements, just the little blurb of them to you now, because I think they're very powerful. 1 is be impeccable with your word, speak with integrity, say only what you mean, avoid using the word to speak against yourself or to gossip about others. Use the power of your word in the direction of truth and love. Number 2 is don't take anything personally. Nothing others do is because of you. What others say and do is a projection of their own reality, their own dream. When you are immune to the opinions and actions of others, you won't be the victim of needless suffering. Don't make assumptions. Find the courage to ask questions and to express what you really want. Communicate with others as clearly as you can to avoid misunderstandings, sadness, and drama. With just this one agreement, you can completely transform your life. And I agree. Don't make assumptions. It's life-changing. 4 is always do your best. Your best is going to change from moment to moment. It will be different when you are healthy as opposed to when you are sick. Under any circumstance, simply do your best and you will avoid self-judgment, self-abuse, and regret. I adore this book. Those four rules, if followed, could change your life forever. I think what I love most about this book is how practical it feels. Like each agreement touches on something universal, like the power of words or the tendency to take things personally. While they may seem like common sense, Ruiz has a way of framing them that makes you reflect deeply on how often we fail to live by these ideas in everyday life. I think for me, the second agreement, don't take anything personally, was especially transformative. It's such a liberating mindset to realize that most of what people say or do has little to do with us and much more to do with their own experiences, beliefs, and emotions. That idea alone can significantly reduce emotional suffering and improve your relationships. That being said, the book is not without its challenges. The concepts are simple to understand, but often difficult to implement. Changing deeply ingrained habits of thought like assumptions or perfectionism requires time and effort. Additionally, some readers might find the language a little repetitive or overly abstract in parts. Overall, The Four Agreements is one of the books that rewards rereading because its lessons deepen with time and reflection. It serves as a gentle reminder of how much our happiness is within our own control and how small shifts in perspective can have a profound impact on our lives. I'd recommend it to anyone seeking clarity, peace, or a practical guide for living more mindfully and authentically. And it certainly is a really simple book, which I think is a good place to start and could be a good place to start on this list as well, because sometimes we get lost in really complex ideas about philosophy and psychology that you can kind of feel lost in the woods with how to like implement that into your life. But this is such a practical guide to some emotional freedom. So start here. I'm sure many of you have read it, but it's a good one to start with. Next up is What I Talk About When I Talk About Running by Murakami. Murakami is my favorite author. I adore him. I absolutely adore him. I've read most of his books, but this one especially obviously means a lot to me because it is like part biography, part spiritual reflections on what running long distance means to Murakami. And it's the first book I read that I felt really like my ideas about endurance were reflected in someone else's experiences. He tells the story of some of his marathons, some of his races. He runs a marathon every year, if he can, which I relate to because I run a marathon every year if I can. I think it's a really important thing to do. It's a deeply personal book and it reflects on his dual passions for running and writing, exploring how the two disciplines intertwine and shape his life. I think for me, Murakami is one of those people who, he is my mentor and he doesn't know he's my mentor. I think it's really important to have people that we look up to, that you take inspiration from, and the way he lives his life, the way he speaks about things, and some of his quotes are just so wonderful. This is a book that travels with me a lot. I have brought it to every race I've ever done, and I've read parts of it before, the night before races. Many, many times over, I've shared quotes from it. The way he talks about running as being a kind of place that is suspended in time and what it creates for him is so similar to my own experience. He talks about discipline and endurance in this book. So he draws parallels between physical discipline of long distance running and the mental endurance required for writing novels. Both pursuits demand consistency, patience, and a willingness to push through discomfort, which again is something I have had the pleasure of experiencing both of. I've both written a book and run many races, which is something I never could have imagined doing a few years ago. And that endurance and willingness to suffer through discomfort and pain and find beauty in it is a really lovely, lovely thing. He also does a lot of self-reflection and self-discovery and space for introspection in this book. He talks about aging, ambition, and changing relationships with his mind and his body over time. Something I really found very beautiful about this book was how he speaks about himself in relation to his running performance with age. And one story he tells is running in, I believe it's Yale, but it could have been another university. And he's being overtaken by all of these students with their bouncing ponytails and long legs. And he's a little older at this point, but he's still running, and he doesn't mind being overtaken. He just is still running, and he's so pleased and proud to still be running. And that gave me this sense of like, so I want to cry talking about it now, but such comfort that like you can age gracefully in a sport and you can let people overtake you with their bouncing ponytails and still find that stillness and space to love what you're doing. And the way he speaks about it is so beautiful, so motivational for so many of us. Another theme in this book is solitude and focus. Running in this book is very much portrayed as an act of solitude. Murakami disconnects from the noise and the world, and he finds clarity. Similarly, his writing process is also in solitude. I run alone. I know that there are many, many run clubs out there in the world, and I think they're brilliant, and I love going to them and I love hosting them. But running is a practice of solitude for me. And the way Murakami talks about loneliness and the power of being alone and loving it and moving through time and space with running mirrors my own feelings on solitude. And it's a beautiful story that he tells. He also speaks about the nature of effort, emphasizing the importance of effort over results, highlighting the intrinsic value of striving towards personal goals, regardless of external outcomes. This ethos applies to both running and writing and the world outside of both of those things. Through running, Murakami deepens his connection to the physicality of life, finding a rhythm that balances his creative pursuits with his physical existence. It resonates so much with me because Murakami's introspective and conversational tone makes the book accessible to runners and non-runners alike. For athletes, it captures the mental and emotional journey of long-distance running. For readers, it offers universal lessons about discipline, balance, and the importance of carving out space for oneself in a busy world. It transforms a personal narrative into a relatable exploration of life's challenges, joys, and enduring mysteries. It's an inspiring read for anyone striving to understand themselves or navigate the complexities of creative and physical pursuits. And it really makes marathons and ultramarathons feel really accessible, the way he speaks about it, especially as he ages through the book. And his story of the Athens Marathon is a cracker, so definitely read it. Even just for that, I was laughing. I think, what's so beautiful about 42.2 is just how many stories happen within the race. And when I think back to all the marathons I have run, every single one has a different feeling, a different story, and something that I've learned through every race. And not everyone will understand why that's so important to me. And this book does understand. This book makes it important, and it validates my beliefs that I'm not crazy and that I do think running is poetry. And I think Murakami sees it as poetry as well. So this is just brilliant. And if you haven't read it, please do. Very, 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 very inspiring. Okay. Taking on a more serious note is Mastery by Robert Greene, which is covered in tea because I use this as to hold my tea on my bedside table because it is a big book. This book took me a long time to read, and I wanted to drive home the point that that is not a bad thing. This is a pretty heavy book. Robert Greene's books are heavy. He also has another one called The 48 Laws of Power, which is an amazing novel. But I'm like a quarter of the way through that, and I probably won't finish it for another year. When I'm in the space and I feel very fired up and I feel powerful and I want to be in my entrepreneurial spirit, I start delving into this book, but I do it with post-it notes and note taking. So this is very much a book to read when you're in your scholarly era. It's not so much like a relaxing, although I did read it in bed a few times. It's a pretty, you know what, it's actually very digestible. I will say it did intimidate me at first, but it is not, the topics are not hugely complex. They are things that I think are very digestible, and they do make you feel very powerful in the way he talks a lot about the roles of moving through your life towards a place of mastery. And mastery means mastering an art, whether that's running or entrepreneurship, painting, whatever it is. This book takes you on a journey from mentoree to mentor to master. It draws on historical examples, scientific research, and interviews from contemporary masters. It reveals the timeless principles that drive individuals to reach their fullest potential. The book emphasizes that mastery isn't the result of talent alone, but a deliberate and structured process anyone can follow with patience, discipline, and perseverance. The key themes in the book are discovering your life's calling. So Greene argues that mastery begins with identifying your passion or life's task. This involves deeply understanding yourself. And this is, he talks a lot about inner child work here. Like, I think he speaks about the Jungian concept of what did you do as a child that made hours pass like minutes? Herein lies the key to your earthly pursuits. That whole idea of joy and play, being that kind of like seed of the calling and the purpose of your life. And from that calling and purpose, you can then drive the discipline to become the master of that purpose. So for me, that's very much coaching, teaching, running. That's pretty much it. I'm pretty simple. For someone else, it might be architecture, cookery. You know, it's whatever it is that gives you that sublime. He talks a lot about the sublime in this feeling of flow, and how to find it and connect to it. He speaks about it in this book. He then goes on to talk about the apprenticeship phase, which is, in order to achieve mastery, you must dedicate yourself to a period of focused learning, often referred to as the apprenticeship. This phase involves developing skills, learning from mentors, embracing challenges and failures and mistakes as essential parts of the growth process, which basically means being a beginner is how we all begin. Being an embarrassing, bumbling beginner is very beautiful. And so many of us, I think now, because we are sort of given this polished, perfect, finished product delivered to us a lot, we forget that really the most beautiful part is the beginner stages. And it's like learning something new and being really bad at it is so important on your way to mastery. And everybody starts that way. He then goes on to talk about mentorship and learning, like I said about Murakami, who is my mentor, who doesn't know he's my mentor. Mentors play a critical role in the path to mastery, offering guidance, wisdom, and opportunities for accelerated learning. Greene highlights the importance of choosing the right mentor and eventually breaking away to establish your unique identity and independence. So obviously not everybody has access to physical mentors that we can meet up with and have Zoom calls and talk about our problems with. I certainly didn't. I had no one who I knew in the fitness space or in the entrepreneurship space or in any of the spaces that I wanted to move into. So I just adopted them myself. Like, I found podcast hosts that I like, authors that I liked, philosophers that I liked, people on social media who I liked, for example, like Courtney DeWalter, who is an ultra runner who I really look up to in more ways than just her athletic performance. Murakami is another one. Andrew Huberman was a big mentor. He doesn't know that, of mine. When I started this podcast, I remember sitting in therapy, crying to my therapist and saying, I'm so frustrated because for some reason I've ended up as a fitness influencer posting photos of myself. And that feels soulless. It's so far away from my purpose, so far away from my sublime. I want to be like Huberman. I want to give knowledge to the world. I want to make a lasting change. I don't know how to do this. And then here I am trying. I don't know if I'm at his level, but at least I'm in the apprenticeship phase, which is really exciting because maybe one day I'll be a master. Who knows? But those are all mentors that I have looked up to and people who I kind of want to emulate, not so much in all aspects of their life, but in the way that they teach people, in the way that they perform, and in the way that they are. So I think you can have mentors that aren't necessarily physical people that you meet up with. I'm really lucky that I do have mentors that I have met through being an embarrassing beginner and moving in spaces that terrify me, networking, and then meeting people who are nice enough to meet me for 30 minutes for a coffee and tell me what I'm doing wrong, which is really lovely. And, that's through people in sports, people in business, people in the world of social media. Having those voices and people who you can look up to and people who have been through it and people who have made really big mistakes is also a really nice one. Like when I've been through a couple of like really big wobbles, the question I always ask is like, do you know anyone who's been through this and survived? And they're always like, yeah, there are loads of people who have been through what you've been through. And that's another part of mentorship, is calmly guiding you through troubled storms, I would say, but they don't have to be real. So maybe an exercise could be picking 3 mentors who you don't know, but people who have traits that you would like to emulate and work towards, and write down the traits that you would like to have. And then you could start working towards them. He talks about something else in this book, which is the 10,000 hour rule, which is the idea that deliberate practice over thousands of hours is the key to achieving mastery. This process involves persistent effort, attention to detail, and the willingness to push through frustration and plateaus. Which, that's like my whole story. I think that kind of idea that time will pass anyway. There will be plateaus, there will be mistakes, there will be frustration, there will be boredom. But on the road to mastery, you just keep plodding along. You just keep putting in those 10,000 hours. And I can tell you, in so many times where I've wanted to just falter and stop and quit and say, I'm never going to be a runner, I'm never going to do this, I'm never going to make it happen, I'm having moments of that in my career at the moment where I'm like, is this worth it? I'm not sure, but I'm going to put my 10,000 hours in anyway because the time will pass. I may as well try and master this thing. And anyone you see who's like the great poets or painters or architect, anyone has put in their 10,000 hours. They have sat behind a desk or they have laced up their shoes or whatever it is, and they have just gone about their work in a calmly consistent way without complaining, without faltering at plateaus, and just getting on with it. And of course that's easier said than done, but I really liked the idea and the feeling of empowerment that the 10,000 hour rule gave me when I read this book. He talks a lot about embracing resistance and adaptation. So challenges, setbacks, and resistance are inevitable on the road to mastery. Greene emphasizes the importance of embracing these moments as opportunities for growth, learning, and sharpening your skills. I mean, we all know that mistakes are what make us, and mistakes are what make us brilliant, and they're how we learn. Very important. And then the last thing he talks about is the master's mind, which is cultivating a heightened sense of focus, patience, and adaptability. Greene explains how mastery requires the ability to see the bigger picture while also paying attention to the smaller details. He talks about stories of great masters, which I actually really enjoyed because sometimes it can feel like you want to be well-read and worldly, but you don't want to have to go away and read a book on all the great people that have ever lived. This is a really lovely way to learn a little bit about each master. I think he talks about Da Vinci, Darwin, Einstein, Martha Graham. There are so many wonderful masters in this book, and each example showcases dedication, persistence, unique approach to challenges led to extraordinary achievements, and it's so inspiring. So as someone who considers themselves a late bloomer, someone who spent years feeling like they were always behind and failing and unsure of my path, Mastery by Robert Greene felt like a lifeline. It wasn't just another motivational book filled with platitudes. It was a blueprint for how to turn those years of struggle into something meaningful and transformative. I do think the apprenticeship phase, finding your life's calling, and mastery being earned but not innate is a really, really empowering thought for me. And it's definitely shaped how I have moved through the world. And I would say, especially in business, this book has been a really big help for me in stepping a little bit more into my confidence and power. I struggle a lot with asking, like, why me? Like, should I be saying these things? Should I be giving advice? Should I? And then you think, actually, I've put in pretty much my 10,000 hours. And no, actually, I think I could be a master at this, and I'm going to use my voice and I'm going to step into my power. And that's really lovely. And I hope one day when I'm older, I can be a mentor for people. I think that would make my life rather complete. And I'm not going to cry when I say that. Why is everything making me cry today? Yeah, mastery was a game changer. It taught me that it's never too late to grow, evolve, and excel. The process of mastery isn't about where you start, it's about where you're willing to go and how much you're willing to learn along the way. This book didn't just inspire me, it gave me a roadmap for continuing to build on the success I'd finally started to achieve. I am so happy I found this book. He's also on a lot of podcasts, Robert Greene. So if you would prefer to hear him speak, he has been on, I think, all of the Modern Wisdom, Andrew Huberman, those are two off the top of my head. I'd love to hear him in conversation with a woman. Maybe one day he could, I don't know, that would be amazing. Big dreams. But if you prefer to hear him speak, he speaks on podcasts too. So Mastery, brilliant book. I'd give that a 10, that one. Okay, moving on to Maxwell Maltz, Psycho-Cybernetics. This is quite a famous book. One that I had to buy a new copy because I lost it in Spain and I wanted to include it in this. So this is a self-help classic and it explores the connection between self-image and success. It offers practical techniques to reshape how we think, how we act, and how we achieve our goals. It's written by a plastic surgeon turned self-help pioneer. This book is rooted in the idea that our self-perception profoundly influences our performance, happiness, and overall quality of life. This book I read this a while ago now, actually. But I found it's quite interactive, which I really, really like. So it has like pages that you can write notes on, which is really cool. I wish I had my original copy, but it's somewhere in a suitcase that I lost. It's timeless because it bridges psychology, neuroscience, and self-help in a really practical way. The idea that we can reprogram our minds to overcome limitations and achieve goals appeals to anyone seeking personal growth. It's accessible, it blends scientific principles with relatable anecdotes and actionable advice. I think it's great for anyone who's looking to boost self-confidence, break free from negative thought patterns, or achieve greater success in any areas of life. If you're an entrepreneur, athlete, artist, whatever, someone just striving for self-improvement, I think this is a good one for you. And I won't talk... This one, I'm not as passionate about, but I did want to put it in there because it is a little shorter and it is easy to read and it does have interactive parts, a lot of space for note-taking, which I do think is a really, really important way to learn. So if you are someone who struggles with self-confidence and feels intimidated by something like this might be a better place to start. It is a really, really lovely book. And it can feel like a revelation for people. For me, it certainly did in parts. For me, thinking about how I spent years in a body that I didn't feel comfortable in, it's almost impossible not to let that shape how you see yourself, right? And even after I lost the weight and began running regularly, I still carried the image of my old self, the girl who wasn't athletic and always felt out of place in workout gear or in the gym. But this book helped me understand that no amount of physical change can truly transform your life if you also don't address what's happening in your mind, which I very firmly believe in, and this book reaffirms that. So Maltz's concept of the self-image as a foundation for our behavior and achievements was eye-opening. I realized I'd been holding on to the narrative that no longer served me. Even though I was running marathons and feeling stronger, I still saw myself as the girl who doesn't belong there. I'd think I'll never be fast enough, or everyone can tell that I'm a fraud. Reading this book made me confront those limiting beliefs and understand that my self-image was dictating my actions. The visualization exercises were especially impactful, and I started imagining myself as a confident, capable runner, not the woman trailing at the back, apologizing for taking up space. I pictured myself running with ease, crossing finish lines, holding up medals all around the world and celebrating the effort instead of obsessing over whether I looked like I fit in. Over time, I noticed that the way I showed up for my runs changed. I stopped hesitating to sign up for races or worrying about what others thought. Huge. I actually was doing this the other day, and this is a reason why I remembered to bring this book today. I have been through a period of a little bit of stagnation, and I noticed that I had slipped back into my negative thoughts about, I don't belong here, I'm not good enough, I'm not a runner, I'm not fast, I'm not good at this, da-da-da-da-da. That old negative cycle that is so outdated but comes back to me when I'm in times of trouble. And what I started to do was literally force myself to say, I'm the fastest girl in London. So I texted my friend on Saturday morning, we met for a run. I'm the fastest girl in London. I'm the fastest girl in London. And I visualized myself like, I am the fastest girl in London. And my splits went from 6:20s to like 4:30s just through visualization. Do you know how crazy that is? That's insane. And it is so true. When you think that you're lethargic and you think that you are slow and you tell yourself that you can't do something, you will never do it. But if you tell yourself you're the fastest girl in London, you're powerful, you're strong, when I lace up these shoes, I'm a freaking athlete, man. I'm running around Bushy Park doing 5:30 splits. Insane, because I'm visualizing it. And it gives me goosebumps talking about it because it is so powerful and it's so true. You have to step into that power, but the person that has to believe it is you. So leaving those old, outdated patterns of your past self behind, this book could really help you do that. So for anyone who's struggled with self-doubt or felt trapped by their past, Psycho-Cybernetics is a powerful tool. It reminded me that I'm more than my mistakes, my fears, or my weight. The person I am today is a reflection of how I choose to see my fears and myself, and I have the power to keep shaping that image. Thanks to this book, I'm no longer just a woman who runs. I'm a runner, period. And more importantly, I'm someone who feels strong, worthy, and proud of how far I've come. It's a great book. It's an easy read, and I would say go for it. It says happiness and success are habits, so are failure and misery, but negative habits can be changed. It's true. Rumination, negative. We spiral into it without even realizing we're doing it. So I do think it's a very good book. I'd give it an 8. This gets a 10, and that gets a 7. Okay, next up is The Shining, which I'm so... Oh, this is so undiagnosed Cassia as a child. Okay, The Shining. First of all, Stephen King. Stephen King. So the first book I ever read was Cujo and Pet Sematary, which, go figure, I was an absolute horror fanatic growing up. I, if you don't know, was an absolute goth in every sense of the word. I loved anything gothic literature, gothic music. And yes, I suppose you could argue Stephen King is not goth, and I would agree. He's not in the canon of goth literature, but he's definitely horror, and he definitely has gothic themes within his books. Salem's Lot, that was a book. But I wanted to talk about The Shining today because it was one of the first books I read, and there's an image or a picture of me when I was like 9 years old in my grandma's house reading The Shining, and just like smiling ear to ear. I have always loved gory, gruesome, eerie, creepy imagery, and especially as a fan of Kubrick and the Shining film, I just love the world that Stephen King creates. And I think this book changed my life because it just opened me up to this world of like rich imagery and make-believe and horror in a way that was like so exciting to me. At the same time, I was exploring new styles of fashion and new styles of music, and it was a really exciting time, and I felt like I was really discovering myself through this novel. And it was one of those really like, I don't know, turn points in my life where I discovered something I really loved, and I just didn't necessarily know why I loved it. I just knew that I loved it. And so the book is a psychological horror. It explores themes of isolation, family dynamics, addiction, foreshadowing, and the supernatural. Set against the backdrop of the eerie Overlook Hotel, the story delves into the unraveling of a fragile family and the sinister forces that inhabit the hotel. So the book is around, I actually didn't even think about this, but yeah, Jack Torrance is a struggling writer and recovering alcoholic. He takes a job as a winter caretaker of the Overlook Hotel, luxurious but remote resort in Colorado, and he takes his little boy and his wife with him. And Danny has a psychic ability called the Shining, which allows him to see glimpses of the hotel's dark past. He begins to experience terrifying visions even before the family arrives at the Overlook. And it's got that famous red ram scene in it. And I think, I really loved Danny's visions. And I remember reading them like almost like totally gleeful of like how scary they were, especially the room 237. I have 237 tattooed on my finger because I bloody love this book so much. I was just obsessed with that imagery and like escaping into that world of like horror. I loved it so much. But in the book, Jack slowly descends into madness and he becomes increasingly unhinged. He grows violent and paranoid, eventually succumbing to the Overlook's control. Meanwhile, Danny uses his psychic abilities to understand the escalating danger and seek help. So I think I just really enjoyed how much eerie escalation there was towards this like horrible outcome of basically a father trying to kill his family, which is just like, as a 9-year-old, pretty scary. And it just really, it thrilled me so much. The themes in the book, I now know as an adult, having reread it a few times now, are isolation and madness, addiction and redemption, family dynamics, and the supernatural versus human nature. And I think the feeling of isolation and that maddeningness of the dad and his addictions, and, you know, it's a real metaphor for the struggles of life and what we all go through in our suffering of life too. But it is an iconic novel, and if you've never read a Stephen King, I would say The Shining is a good place to start. If not this, then maybe Cujo too. I almost brought Cujo with me, but I thought 2 King novels might be overkill. It's masterful, and it combines psychological depth with supernatural horror, creating a story that's terrifying and emotionally resonant. The vivid description, complex characters, and exploration of universal fears like losing control or harming loved ones makes it a landmark work in the horror genre. So again, you know, Kubrick made an adaptation of this film, which I would say, if you haven't, please go and watch. I'll definitely have to do an episode about films that changed my life as well. But yeah, this is an edition. I think this is the edition that I had growing up. I think it must have been my granddad's. I think this is from the 80s. I'm very sentimental about books. Like I'm weirdly like, I don't know, they just give me feelings. It is. 1973. Oh. So yeah, I would say this one, Salem's Lot, and Cujo would be my 3 recommendations, but brilliant book. Changed my life. Really did. The Overlook is always in my brain, I think. Maybe the Overlook represents, I don't know, how I was feeling at the time and how isolated I felt and strange. And that's when patterns of behavior had started happening for me. So perhaps that's what I was thinking about at that time, that I had my own little Overlook in my brain. And maybe I was going to end up like Jack. But I didn't. So anyway, 11 out of 10. 9 Lives podcast is proudly sponsored by Pure Sport. As you know, rituals and routines have been a huge part of my own wellness journey and transformation, and I have been using their supplements since the very beginning. Things like their mushroom complex, magnesium, and the muscle balm have honestly changed the game when it comes to my recovery and performance. You can use the code 9lives at checkout for a discount. Thank you so much, Pure Sport, for sponsoring this podcast. Okay, next. Which is a book that changed so many people's lives. And it's kind of like Marmite, this book, I find when I speak to people about it. It is The Courage to be Disliked. I lost my copy of this again in that suitcase, so this is a new one. This book I found hard to read. I didn't think it was going to take the format that it did of the storytelling that it takes, which is through the eyes of a young man and being taught or going to a master and asking a question. I thought it would be a little bit more of like, I don't know, practical stuff about being disliked, but it's a story, which by the time I got into it, I really did enjoy. It is a philosophical self-help book that distills the teachings of Alfred Adler, the Austrian psychologist, into a conversational dialogue between a wise philosopher and a curious young man. The book challenges traditional notions of happiness, success, and interpersonal relationships, encouraging readers to embrace personal freedom, take responsibility for their lives, and find the courage to live authentically. The core concept within this book, and it's such a powerful title, I mean, The Courage to Be Disliked is, it's probably one of the best titles in the world. The core concepts of this book are freedom through responsibility, so arguing that we're not determined by our past traumas or circumstances. Instead, our present choices shape our lives. It's not what happens to us, but how we interpret and respond to events that determines our happiness or growth. One of the book's central ideas that I found very interesting was separation of tasks. So understanding what is within your control and what belongs to others. You're responsible for your own actions and feelings, but not for how others respond to you. This principle helps reduce unnecessary conflict and worry. So we touched on that a lot within the people-pleasing episode, and I actually took a lot of my learnings from this book for that episode. But the whole idea that you can never control how people feel or think or act. And the more that you try to, the less life you're living for yourself, which leads into living without validation, which is the book challenges the need for external approval, arguing that seeking validation from others leads to a loss of personal freedom. True happiness comes from focusing on your own values and living authentically, even if it means being disliked by others. Terrifying, but it's definitely true. He argues that life is a series of interpersonal relationships. So Alderian philosophy places a strong emphasis on community and relationships. The authors stress that happiness is found through contributing to others, building connections, and feeling a sense of belonging, which is true. Community is everything. Community is so, so important for our own self-improvement, but it is also through helping others and teaching and growing with others that we become filled up and feel full as human beings and feel like we're contributing to the world. He also talks about the pursuit of self-acceptance. So the philosopher explains that self-acceptance is about embracing imperfections and focusing on what you can change rather than dwelling on what you cannot. Personal growth stems from action, not self-criticism or regret. Action creates energy, guys. I know I've said this a million times, but the less time you spend ruminating on what you cannot change and never will, and the more time you spend flinging open the door and jumping into life, the better your life will become. I can't tell you how many times before I went to events or races or things that bloody terrified me, if I had wasted 10 more minutes in the mirror ruminating about things I couldn't control, like the way I look or the things I want to say or how people perceive me, then I wouldn't have gone and I wouldn't have had some of the best experiences of my life. So yeah, personal growth stems from action. It talks about goals over causes. It introduces the idea that people often use past traumas as an excuse to avoid taking action. Hard truth. Instead of being tied to the causes of past events, Alderian psychology encourages focusing on the goals you wish to achieve in the present rather than dwelling on the traumas of your past. And I know that's easier said than done because sometimes it can feel like your traumas are suffocating you, but it definitely is so much healthier and fosters a much better experience in your life if you can focus that energy on the goals that you want for your future. The key takeaways are: you are free to choose your life path. You cannot please everyone. You have to focus on what you control, and happiness is contribution. So finding joy and creating value for others. And I couldn't agree more with all of it. I did find the dialogue between the philosopher and the young man sometimes a little bit difficult to stay interested in. But I did enjoy it. And the concept of living without validation hit me really hard. As a recovered people pleaser, I've spent years bending over backwards to make sure others approved of me, even at the cost of my own well-being. So this book asked me to step into a space where I stopped seeking external validation altogether, which is terrifying for someone like me who's always relied on the approval of others to feel worthy. But the philosopher's explanation made so much sense. True freedom comes from living authentically, even if it means some people will dislike you. Overall, the courage to be disliked felt like the push I needed to start breaking free from the patterns that no longer served me. It gave me permission to prioritize myself and embrace the fact that I don't need to please everyone to be worthy. If you're someone who struggled with people pleasing or the lingering effects of being bullied, this book can be an eye-opener. It's not a quick fix, but it offers a perspective that could change the way you see yourself and your place in the world for the better. This gets a 6 out of 10, maybe a 7 out of 10 from me. It is good. The flow I found a little difficult, but the concepts are amazing. And I do think if you're a people pleaser, this is definitely one for you. Next up is The End of Everything by Katie Mack, which is joyous, beautiful, and strange. It is by a woman who is a theoretical astrophysicist. She explores 5 scientifically plausible scenarios for the ultimate fate of the universe, making complex cosmological concepts accessible and engaging for the readers. So I wanted to include this one because I went through a phase in my life where I was obsessed with astrology and dinosaurs. Very, very interested. And I read as many books as I could, but I always found it really, really hard to understand and really hard to digest. And I've always found physics and theoretical physics so fascinating because it is everything. It's everything around us, but really hard to grasp. I don't have a brain for maths or science. I have a very much like an artistic brain. But this book was the first book I read where I understood everything, and it made me really excited, and I could then tell people what I had learned about it, and it was really exciting, and I just think it's a brilliant book. I think it's such a wonder. I think everybody should read this, just to understand our place in the universe a little bit more as well. Like, it's so cool. So it is a little morbid, like it is about the end of the universe. It is about the end of everything, which I'm a little bit of a positive nihilist, so I do not find the prospect of the end of the universe or death to be a scary thing. I actually find it incredibly hopeful and strangely beautiful. I think the fact that everything is temporary is what makes life so wonderful. And it's really what causes a lot of great motivation for me. So reading about the end of the universe doesn't bother me. But if it does bother you, maybe don't read this. So she talks about how the universe will end, basically. So she talks about the big crunch, which is the scenario that the universe expansion could reverse, causing all matter to collapse back into singularity, effectively ending the universe in a massive implosion. How cool. That is so metal. I love it. Then she talks about heat death, which is also known as the big freeze. This theory suggests that the universe continues to expand. It will reach a state of maximum entropy where all energy is evenly distributed, leading to a cold, dark, and lifeless cosmos. Then the big rip. In this hypothesis, the universe expansion accelerates to the point where dark energy tears apart the galaxies, stars, planets, and eventually atoms themselves, resulting in a catastrophic disintegration of all matter. So fascinating. I just think it's so cool. And these are all theoretical, by the way, so they're not, no one knows if they're going to happen. Then she talks about vacuum decay, which involves a quantum event, creating a lower energy bubble that expands at the speed of light, annihilating everything in its path and fundamentally altering the laws of physics. How fascinating and cool is that? And you know what's so funny is when I was at school, I hated science. I skipped physics and biology, and I hated it. And now as I've got older, I don't know, maybe if it's just that you want to understand the world around you a bit more, but I just want to be as knowledgeable as possible, and learning about oceans and the stars and everything in between just like fills me with so much excitement. And I think as well the fact that it's written by a woman who is so damn smart is just the coolest thing in the world. But the exploration is infused with wit and clarity. She makes profound scientific ideas accessible to non-specialists. She delves into the implications of each scenario, not only for the cosmos, but also for our understanding of existence and the nature of reality. By examining these potential cosmic finales, the book offers a captivating journey through life and death of the universe, encouraging readers to ponder profound existential questions. As someone who has completely transformed myself physically, mentally, and emotionally, reading the end of everything was humbling and empowering. On the surface, it's a book about the grand scale demise of the universe, but to me, it felt deeply connected to the process of personal transformation and the cycles of destruction and rebirth that we all go through. She has an incredible way of taking something as vast and incomprehensible as the cosmos and making it feel personal. The idea that everything in the universe, no matter how solid or eternal it seems, is in a constant state of change really resonated with me. Obviously, I've lost a lot of weight, but it wasn't just a physical transformation. It was dismantling of old habits, identities, and even relationships that no longer fit. In a way, I had my own big crunch, collapsing the person I used to be to make space for something new. So if you're someone who's been through a transformation, whether it's like physical, mental, emotionally, spiritually, this book will remind you of the power of change on every scale. And it's a reminder that endings, no matter how daunting, are part of the natural order and often pave the way for new beginnings. The end of everything didn't just expand my understanding of the universe, it deepened my appreciation for the constant process of evolution, both in the cosmos and within ourselves. 10 out of 10. Okay, the last book, which is my favorite book, which is the most cliche book in the world, and I don't care. Because it is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Now, I'll give a backstory to this book because I'm sure you all know what the story is about. It is a classic. So I had never read a book before that the character had depression or a mood disorder or felt very strange in the world or acted very badly in the world. And at the time I read this, I think I was 13, 12 to 14, I can't remember. It was around the time the Black Parade came out, so I probably was 13. And I remember reading it I was in a state of self-disgust at that time, and I had a lot of anger issues in my early teens. And I couldn't understand why I was just so mad at the world. And I really, really resonated with the character in this book because he felt so out of place and so angry and so disgusting and so strange. And the story is so strange. And he is not that nice, but he's trying to love someone, and it's awkward and strange, and it made me feel less alone. And I think a lot of people who read this book were into like alternative culture. And there's even one of my favorite bands, the guitarist Frank Iero, started a band called Pensy Prep, which is the name of the school in this book. And I loved Pensy Prep, and I loved this book, and it was a little bit of a cult, and it was maybe a bit strange, but it was really, really great. And it's a classic coming of age novel that captures the delusionment and angst of adolescence. Through the voice of its protagonist, Holden Caulfield, Salinger explores themes of identity, alienation, and the struggle to find meaning in an often hypocritical and superficial world. And it is a story of breaking point and redemption, of alienation and loneliness, of loss of innocence, identity and belonging, and phoniness, which Holden says phoniness in this book like 100 times. But he's always critiquing the phoniness of adults and societal norms, highlighting his disillusionment with conventional expectations and the superficiality he perceives around him. And I did find at that time in my life that I was finding it very, very difficult to relate to the people at my school, most especially. I knew that I was odd, and I knew that I was being purposely odd, and I knew I was isolating myself on purpose. I was thinking everyone was a phony, and I was listening to my really alternative music and being very cool. And I think this book just gave me a little bit of a space to feel a little bit seen by a character that I hadn't read before. Everything I'd read, I hadn't read these books yet. Well, I'd read Stephen King, but I'd never read about an adolescent, especially a boy, you know. It felt quite mischievous, very adult. And I really enjoyed the relationships within it. The relationships he was having with women and with girls felt, they weren't good. And I think it was the first time I'd read a book where the relationships were so dysfunctional, and he was so angry. And there was just something about it. It was a moment in time. It came to me at exactly the right age, at exactly the right time. And it felt very special. And I think I'll always go back and read this book and feel that same... I can't quite explain it. I remember reading it in... I used to skip sports at school. And I remember reading it in the cloisters and just... I don't know. I just loved it. It was a little space I could go to. And if you haven't read it, it is a classic. And I would say that it's, it's one to read. But the title of the novel, it comes from a fantasy that Holden has about standing in a rye field, catching children who are on the verge of falling off a cliff. This metaphor represents his desire to shield children from the corruption and complexities of adulthood, a role he idealizes but struggles to reconcile with in reality. And it really is about that point in a man or woman's, or person's, I should say, life between adolescence and adulthood, that awkward becoming and anger and strangeness, and where you don't know who you are or what you're doing or what your body's doing and what your mind is doing and what your girlfriends and boyfriends and friends are doing. And it encapsulates that angst so perfectly. I think I was at the perfect age to read it, but it's definitely worth a read now if you haven't. And yeah, this gets a 10 as well. They're all 10s. So that is the 8 books that changed my life. I love them very dearly. I have many, many more that I can tell you about, but I thought I'd start with a nice mix of a few that have been ones that have really impacted me. And I'll end with a very short poem, because I didn't want to not have a poem in an episode. This is by Robert Frost, and it's Nothing Gold Can Stay. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leafs a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. I've always loved that poem. So thank you for listening. Let me know what your favourite books are. Send me a DM. Let me know if you pick any of these up or if you try them. Please like, subscribe, follow, all those things. Until next week, keep reading.